Bit different this week. Welcome back to Almost Blues Brothers podcast. It's been a couple of weeks. We had the mid-season buy-off because I'm actually overseas with my lovely partner. I'm recording from Albania, a little town called Berat in Albania right now. UNESCO protected? Yes or no? Is UNESCO protected? Must be a question. It's World Heritage protected, this town. It was established 4th century BC, correct? All you have to do is give me anyway. I think it was established 4th century BC, Berat, Albania, and I have just finished watching the game. It is currently 5:12 p.m. on Sunday here, which corresponds to, I believe, 1:12 a.m. Monday morning Eastern Standard Time in Melbourne. And it is a different look this week. It's just me. Being a Sunday night game, being that I am overseas, this was a difficult one to try and tee up with Jules and Dan. We were thinking about maybe not even doing one at all, but we had the week off last week, and I'm going to take some time now, just very briefly this week. I don't know if it's going to go for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it goes for, just to give some thoughts off the bat after watching that one. But it'll just be me today. I think that's the first time we've ever done it this way. So, before we get into it, as we usually do, I usually ask what their weekend was like. Not that anyone really cares, but I've been on holiday for a couple of weeks now. If you've tuned into this at any point over the last few years, you've probably picked up that my partner, Gabrielle, has been living in the UK, and we left the UK last week, and this is our last little stint on an overseas trip before returning home. So it's been good. We're in Corfu earlier in the week. Albania now. I'm very relaxed. As you can see, if you're watching, I am very tanned. I'm actually a little bit burnt, to be honest, but it's been nice. I'm relaxed. I was relaxed for the last couple of weeks, up until the last couple of hours. But anyway, that's that. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Now, I do hope the internet is holding up as well. I don't know how this is going to go on review, but hopefully we've got a decent recording coming here. Now, I have just finished watching the game, literally about 5 minutes ago, and trying to avoid the scores and any chats or messages all day is tough. It is tough. We've been driving for most of the day, and I told my partner not to give me any indication of whether we won or lost. But, however, it is really difficult in this day and age to avoid any messages. And I received 3 that I saw. The first one was from my brother-in-law, Chris, and it was in our family chat. And the message read, "I'm leaving Carlton." Now, he actually used to be a Collingwood supporter, and we've converted him recently as a family. But that was the message. And I saw it, and I went, "Oh, God, what's happened?" The second one was a call from Paul Sebastiani on Messenger. And usually when Paul calls me, it is to absolutely put the boots in to this team. So I thought, okay, let's build it up. And then the third message that I saw once I opened Messenger was a message from Dan. And it said, "Did you watch that live?" Now, I put those together, not having seen the scores, not having watched the game. And I still didn't look at the scores at this point, and I never did up until the final siren. And I was thinking, okay, one of two ways. We've either blown them out the water, and my brother-in-law's message is because it's such a roller coaster every week, you don't know what you're going to get, or we played so terribly. There's my initial thoughts. We played so terribly that it's not even worth watching. So I put the stream on, KO, start watching. Had to close the app quickly to reload, start again, bring it forward to the point that I thought I'd stopped watching it at, but it was actually at quarter time, and I saw the score. It was 40-6 in favour of us. And I thought, putting all those messages together, knowing we're 40-6, we've bottled this, and we're going to lose from 40 points up, essentially. So I watched that game with bated breath and the assumption that at some point we were going to absolutely choke that lead and drop 4 points for 2.5 hours. I've never been more stressed watching a game of footy in my life. However, as everyone would know by now, the final scores from the MCG on King's Birthday Eve against one of, if not our most bitter arch rival in the game, maybe outside of Collingwood, in front of 74,000 on a Sunday night. Final scores 11-12, and I'll come back to that. 11-12, 78. Carlton defeat Essendon by 8 points, 11-4, 70. Goal kickers for the Blues, Akers, De Koning, Fantasia, McGovern, and Sard. 1 each. Curnow, Motlop, and Williams, 2 each. And there's a few players there I'm going to talk about in this review. No injuries. Will White came on 3/4 time and replaced Matt Carroll, who I thought was actually really good on the day prior to being subbed. My initial thoughts. I know there's gonna be a lot of people. There's gonna be a lot of people that think very negatively of that performance because we had a 40-point lead and because we went into quarter time 40-6. There's gonna be a lot of people that may look at the positives, but will likely look at the negatives first of that game. I'll ask a question first to anyone listening or watching. Would you rather come away with 4 points in that game or not? First question I ask. The answer from everyone should be a resounding yes. Second question I ask. We were 15th going into this game. As a fan of a club this year who has shown for a majority of the year so far that we actually play like a club that should be around 15th, how many of you are actually surprised that we let Essendon back in? And the answer from a resounding majority of people should be that you're not surprised at all, because it's what we've seen for 13 weeks to this point. Then I'll ask my final question. How much better do you feel that we actually held on in what eventuated as a tight one, rather than completely choking and dropping all 4 points? How do you feel being 5 and 7 instead of 4 and 8 at this point in the season? And the resounding answer should be, or I would hope would be, that you feel relieved and you feel much better than if we had have dropped that completely. Because I know I do. And especially after watching it, thinking that we were going to choke it. It was a very weird way to watch the game, thinking that we were going to choke it. It was so close. I was waiting for something to happen. It never happened. We absorbed the pressure. The moments came where we needed certain players to step up, especially in the last quarter. And we did. And there's been so many times this year where we've asked that of this group, and they actually did it today in a lot of key moments. Now, I'll talk about the fade out. Yes, it was disappointing to see. It really was. We kicked 6-1 in the first quarter. And then from that point on, from quarter time to the end of the game, we kicked 5 goals, 6. Essendon from quarter time onwards kicked 10 goals, 3. From quarter time onwards, it was 11 scoring shots for us to 13 scoring shots for them. And we actually had a couple out on the full, from memory. What kept Essendon in that game wasn't our ability to nullify them, because there were a lot of passages of play, and I've just watched this, so it's very, very fresh. There were a lot of passages of play in transition where Essendon looked like they were out, and we stood up defensively, whether it be on the last line of defence or cutting off certain handball changes through the corridor, blocking the corridor, nullifying their run. Yes, there were many passages where they got through, and there were many passages where they looked dangerous and where they did punish us, particularly across late in that second quarter and throughout the third. But if you go back and watch, there were a lot of very, very, very good defensive acts by our group individually. Adam Sard comes to mind with his tackle on Jade Gresham in the third quarter, which I think would have got Essendon back to within a goal after a string of handball chains that they had throughout the centre from the back half. there's plenty of moments late in the game where we put our head over the footy, won a couple of high tackles, holding the man decisions, and we're able to slow the game down with a couple of minutes to go and see it out. So the way I look at it is this: 11 goals 4 from Essendon. That is deadly accurate in front of goal. They never kicked more than one behind in any quarter when they missed. We kicked 11-12. It's 8 more scoring shots throughout the game for us. Execution in front of goal, sure, at times could have been a lot better. We had our looks though, and if you look at the stat sheet, more disposals, inside 50s, basically even. Clearance is basically even. Won the contested possession count. Less turnovers by 10. More intercepts by 10. And we're on track for record-breaking numbers as a team over the first 2 quarters. More time in possession. 46% to 36 across the game. More marks. This is a big one. 115 to 65 around the ground. 14 marks inside 50 to 11. 16 contested marks to 7. Hudson O'Keefe, big shout out there. I think he had 6 contested marks on debut, I think they said, which is 1 behind James Podsiadly, from what Gary Lyon was saying in terms of most contested marks on debut. So he had a brilliant game, and I'll talk about individual players in a minute. Time in front. Actually, I'll come back to that one. Tackles, mostly even, 73 to 78. It was a pretty hotly contested game. I actually thought it was a good game overall to watch as well. If you're a neutral, I think you would have been pretty happy with what you were saying. It was pretty fiery, especially after quarter time. It was tense. It's what you want out of footy. 7 bounces to 3. We only used 68 interchanges out of 75. Now, I'm going to come back to this stat here. Marks around the ground. 115 to 65. Plus 50 marks around the ground. What that shows is a level of control of the ball. Now, I'm sure there'll be someone that might correct me with a stat around kick efficiency, around turnover, or whatnot in this game. But I'm looking at the stats. If I'm looking at the eye test and what I saw today, plus 50 marks in the game from any team, to me, shows dominance in possession, regardless of how many more disposals. That clearly translated when you look at time in possession. We had 10% more. So we've dominated the ball when we had it in our hands. We were able to control the game. We were able to slow it down. We had gears that we went through, regardless of whether or not we choked a 40-point lead. I've already highlighted that I believe that choke job, which a lot of people are going to call this, regardless of whether we came over 4 points or not, you've got to give a lot of credit to Essendon in front of goal. And where they got their looks from, kicking 11-4, they made the most of their opportunities. When you come up against a team that takes their opportunities, that is usually going to happen in games of football. If Essendon don't kick that accurate in front of goal, they miss a couple, and then we go back the other end and we score, it looks like a very different game. You only really need 1 or 2 of those moments from a team that's been on the ropes for the entire game because we're in front from go to woe. It looks like a very, very different game if they don't take their opportunities. So overall, am I happy? Yes, is the answer. Happy we got the 4 points. Happy with the performance that they put on. Is there areas that this team still needs to work on? Yes. Without a doubt, yes. I think it was good to see that mentally we were never out of it. And I think the difference between a game like this and a game like what we saw against the Bulldogs earlier in the year, Richmond, round 1, was that when the pressure came, it never really felt like we were completely dead in the water and Essendon were on top of us, they were running over the top of us. Even when they were coming, and even with me thinking the result was going to be that we dropped 4 points today, when I looked at it, I was scratching my head thinking, how are we going to choke this if we do? Because what I saw, outside of a small patch within the third quarter where our pressure rating dropped below 200, our pressure rating, when the game was in the balance, was well above 200. Start of the fourth quarter, we nailed them. First 5 or 10 minutes, I think when Zach Williams ran into an open goal, shows the ball to the crowd, we go 4 goals up. Up until that point in the last quarter, I was sitting here going, how do we choke this? How is it? How are they going to come back and beat us? based on the messages that I got earlier in the day, because we were all over them. We wanted it more when the game was on the line. They never really looked like, even though they sort of started coming, they never really looked like they were really going to break us open in that last quarter. And I thought it was a good performance. I think it was a performance from a team that was able to stave off a plucky opposition who took them most of their chances when they came to them. The other thing about footy is usually when a team puts 40-6 on the board, I think we're actually 46-8 at one point. I think it was a 38-point lead early in the second. When you put that sort of score on the board early in a game, you have done the legwork to set up a win. You really have to choke, like we saw against Richmond. Like it has to get really bad for you to drop a game at that point. And I dare say, if you ask Essendon supporters what they thought of their own team's performance from that game, they'd be ropeable that it took them a quarter and a half to switch on. Because they were witches' hats in the first quarter. As good as what we were and as good as the ball movement looked, I think when we hit 46 points, we had 25 points from stoppage and 21 points scored from turnover. Great balance. So all facets of our game were firing. They were just witches' hats. There was no movement about them. There was no life about them to start that game. So we did what we needed to do when they didn't want to show up. We set the game up early on. And regardless of whether or not the scoreboard reflected that we let them back in, I'm sitting here now genuinely saying, with 23 scoring shots to 15 across the game, the scoreboard flattered them in the end. And I don't think there was ever a time in that game where I was really sitting back thinking, gee, we are poor. There have been a lot of weeks this year where I've looked at it and gone, oh my God, we have forgotten how to play football. I don't think that ever really came. There was a small patch in the third where I started to get a little bit worried about how we looked, but it was only fleeting. We were able to arm wrestle it back after that, get it back on our terms, and we actually kicked away in the fourth, which was really good to see. The game was on the line at three-quarter time. It was 10 points or 11 points, whatever it was. They'd kicked back from, I think, 28 points down at halftime, so there was a 3-goal swing in the third. And what our team has shown us across this year is that when the game's on the line, we usually fumble. I didn't see that in the first 10 minutes of the fourth. They were hungry. They wanted to make sure they saw out the win. We kicked away, got it back out to 4 goals, held them off, had a couple of chances late from Akers twice, Charlie. That could have really put the nail in the coffin. And then with 2 minutes to go, it's chip the ball around, see it out, make sure you put your head over the footy, win those contests, win those free kicks, and off you go. So overall, that's how I saw the game. That's how I saw it play out. I'm happy we got the 4 points, regardless of whether or not you think how it should have been. And there'll be people that say it should have been 80 points, it should have been 60 based on how we're playing. Doesn't always work out that way. What worked out was that we got the points and we move on. We're 5-7. We're not 4-8. North and West Coast coming up over the next 2 weeks, and then Port Adelaide. We can square the ledger. We can go on with it. Maybe. Players today. Now, I haven't looked at any stats, so I'm going to start with a few players. I'm going to get into the midfielders in a minute, and I'll get into our stars. But there's a couple of players off the bat that I'll mention. First one, Hudson O'Keefe on debut. I thought he was very, very lively. Played a bit of a weird role. Obviously, that second tall but pinch hit ruck, and took him some time to find his feet. But I don't think he did too much wrong, if I'm being honest. 5 contested marks. I said 6 before, but it was 5. He took 5 marks for the game. All of them were contested. Looked really strong in the air. He attended 21 ruck contests, had 8 hit-outs, 4 tackles. Was good to see. But I just thought he had a bit of a presence about him. And this will sort of feed into Tom a little bit, and Tom De Koning. and I've touched on it a little bit. I'm not speaking on behalf of Dan and Jules this podcast. I'm just giving you my thoughts. But I've touched on Tom a little bit. There was a quote earlier in the week. This. I will come back to Hudson. I promise this ties in. But there was a quote from Weeders during the week. I'm going to get it up here because I found it very, very interesting. And I know a lot of people would have seen this and probably thought the same thing that I did. Let me find it in our story archives. I think it was maybe Fox Footy that posted this during the week. Bear with me. Here we go. I actually spoke to my partner, Gab, about this. And she actually, for someone that doesn't watch football, she gave me the same level of understanding. She doesn't want to be on camera at all. Quote from Wiedering. This was posted by blues.afl on Instagram. And it was on the AFL's handling of player movement. And it's a photo of Weeders and Tom. And obviously he's been asked about Tom in an interview somewhere. The quote goes, I look at the NRL and the maturity and how that code has handled players that are moving on to other teams, and I think we are not quite there as a code. For all intents and purposes for me, there's about an 80% chance at this point that Tom is gone this offseason as a free agent. I think a lot of us are probably feeling that way at the moment. Tom's a brilliant footballer. Is he worth 1.7? I've made my thoughts very clear on that. The answer is no from me. Is he worth around 1 as a ruckman? Yeah, maybe with salary cap increasing. Would I like him to stay? Absolutely. I think Tom is going to be a very, very good player. Will he be a not a premiership winner. Anyone can be a premiership winner. Will he be a match winner for the long term? Still haven't seen it. Still a bit skeptical on that. But if I bring this back to Hudson O'Keefe, that is the prototype of Tom De Koning. A little bit younger, but just as lanky, just as athletic, just as strong in the air, can hold his own in a ruck contest. We signed Pitnet last year for 4 years at $500,000 a year, and people raised their eyebrows thinking, what are we doing? We traded out our first-round draft pick this year to the Hawks as a future pick for Jagger Smith without even batting an eyelid. And we kept Hudson O'Keefe on the list last year. And when it comes to list management, I can tell you one thing. They plan years in advance for things. If I am bringing the sum of those parts together, I think they've known that Tom is likely going to walk for a long time. Long, long time. You've kept a project ruck on your list. You've signed Pitto as your backup ruck for a long term, another 2 years after this, so you've got a backup there. You traded out your first-round pick knowing that maybe definitely a first-round compensation is going to come back to you if Tom walks, so you're always going to have that first-rounder if Tom walks via free agency, restricted. So bringing it back to Hudson O'Keefe, debuts today, halfway through the year. He's come on leaps and bounds in the VFL from what I've understood. And I think on debut, he looks really good for a guy that played his first AFL game today. He's got a lot of work to do. Tom had a lot of work to do after he debuted, if many of us remember. He went back to the VFL and applied his craft a little bit. But I was happy with Hudson O'Keefe. And if it means that Hudson O'Keefe is our future ruck, future first selection ruck, if Tom leaves, as likely as that is looking, then I'm pretty confident he's going to continue to develop in that role and in that area quite strongly based on what we've seen today. So I thought he had a good game. Second one, Jesse Motlop. I'm not looking at stats here, right? None. But the eye test. I'm going to bring you back to a few podcasts ago. Motlop, Jesse has been the whipping boy for many across the year. It's been hard not to critique his performances with as poorly as we played and as poor as he's been in many of those games. What a lot of people failed to recognise, and I'm not going to speak to Dan and Jules for Dan and Jules at all, but I know that Dan and Jules do agree with this, so I probably can speak on their behalf because we've spoken about this on the podcast. The role that Jesse Motlop has been playing this year has not been as a small forward. Not a pure small forward. So a lot of people look at Jesse as, well, he's not hitting the scoreboard. He's not playing his role as a small forward. What impact is he having? He's been up and around the ball at stoppage. He's been at the back of stoppage as well as that first sort of outlet handball. He's played at centre bounce. This is where I will bring the stats in, actually, because this would be interesting. I think he had 0 centre bounce attendances today. I'm going to go out on on a whim. Whim or limb? Is it whim? Limb? Out on a limb. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I still think it's whim. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Jesse Motlop did not attend a single centre bounce today. He didn't. Not one. Not one. He laid 5 tackles. He kicked 2 goals. He was involved in 7 scores and he had 2 goal assists. And he kicked 2 behind, so he could have had an even bigger day. 8 marks, 4 of them inside 50. Only 4 turnovers from his 12 possessions. And if you look at his heat map, I don't know if you can see that. That is the heat map of a small forward, not of a player that pushes up to the back of contests as an outlet. Horatio Fantasia played that role today, and it was a role that Horatio Fantasia was playing in the preseason prior to getting injured. And we have mentioned on this podcast that, yes, Jesse hasn't looked great, particularly at stoppage. He's looked a little bit fumbly at times. We've spoken about the fact that you kind of need to let players develop in that area. But I hope it's crystal clear to people, and it is just one game, so he could regress. Who knows? I don't think he will. I hope it's crystal clear to people now that you need to look at the actual role of a player on game day and not just what you perceive as their role sometimes. And I think Jesse's been a bit of a victim of that this year, and I was really, really happy to see Jesse so lively in the forward 50 today, and that he finally got his shot with Horatio coming in and playing the role that Jesse's been playing, for Jesse to have a little bit more freedom in that forward 50 and a bit more creativity. Although he was brilliant. If we did votes, I'd probably give him a vote, to be honest, but we're not doing votes this year. So they're the 2 off the top of my head that I saw that really stuck out to me, and I think deserves some flowers. The other one that I think deserves some flowers today, actually, another whipping boy this year that people have, actually there's probably 2, to be honest. But I'll start with Blake Acres. 29 disposals, kicked an absolute corker of a goal from the boundary line, 8 marks. A lot of his possessions sort of in the defensive half, 70% of them. But he ran that wing all day, as we've seen Blake Acres run. He actually went at 66%, so it's about what you'd expect from Blake. 7 score involvements today. 7, 456 metres gained, a few clearances, 5 inside 50s, 4 rebound 50s. Solid game from Blake. Solid game. And I thought, outside of a couple of moments that you're probably going to get from Blake every other week, I thought he was very, very good. And late in the game, when he was required and when his gut running was required to be called upon, he was there and he executed. He could have had maybe 1 or 2 other goals, to be honest. But I think he played his role all day. Here's another one for you. And he did look a little bit shaky in some contests. But this is a bloke that we also spoke about on this podcast earlier this year, where we said if you're going to bring him into the side at his age, you have to play him behind the ball. I know me and Dan have said this. Jules thinks he can run a wing still. He may still be able to. But where this bloke has played his best footy is behind the ball as a halfback, uncontested, setting up the ground. Can see the whole ground, has the vision to be able to execute. Sam Doherty, 26 disposals, 21 kicks, 13 marks today. 13. Went at 77%, had 6 intercepts, a couple of clearances, 8 rebound 50s. Did he look a little bit shaky still at times? Yes, no doubt. No doubt. But is that his best performance for us this year? I think you have to say yes. And I think that is the role for Doc. You look at his heat map, again, 93% of his possessions came in the defensive half. That's where you want to see Sam Doherty. Nick Haynes was brilliant again. He had 11 marks. Here's another one, actually, who had, I think, maybe his best game for the club, to be honest. Ollie Hollands, 23 disposals, running that wing. 66% defensive half, 34% offensive half, where his possessions came. But he really ran that wing for a lot of the day. He was coming out of the back half a lot, and he was sort of there to mop up, but he was pushing a lot further up the ground. And he really used his leg speed and his gut running to be able to break lines, which was really good to see. Took 10 marks. Went at 78%. I just thought he had a really solid game. Goal assist, 7 score involvements. That's pretty much what you want from Ollie every other week. I like the role that he played today. Hope to see him doing that a little bit more. Sam Walsh, 32 disposals. Sort of went quiet a little bit. He had a big first quarter. Went quiet a little bit, but then late he came back into the game, started racking them up again. Around the footy, got us out of the bind a couple of times. I thought he had a really good game again today. 406 metres gained. I'd be intrigued. 7 clearances. I'd be intrigued to know what his. I think you can actually get this. How much he ran today. Cooper Lord actually covered the most ground today at 16.5 kilometres. Ollie at 15.8. Walsh isn't in the picture here, so I dare say he still probably covered 14K as he usually would. But he did play a little bit more contested again today. He was a little bit more around the ball. Is that where I think he plays his best footy? Probably not, but he did have a good game. I thought he was consistent. I thought he was one of our better midfielders throughout the day. He torched the footy a little bit, but it wasn't to our detriment too often. George Hewitt, he just keeps on keeping on. 29 disposals again, 9 tackles. Cripper was quiet, as he has been for a lot of the year, but it shouldn't be left up to him every week. I think we should be at a point in our evolution as a football club where we're not relying on a dual Brownlow medalist every week to get us over the line. So it's good to see that we're able to get a win without Cripps having too much of an influence. Zach Williams was good on his return. 2 goals, 15 disposals. Probably would have had a couple more score involvements, I would have thought. 8 score involvements and 2 goal assists. So small forwards between him and Motlop, that's 4 goal assists and 15 score involvements today, which is what you want to see. Charlie was good. It's a tough role sometimes being a key forward. Really is. There'll be a few that say he sort of faded out, that he looks lazy, and I don't know. I've never understood it with Charlie. I think you let him do what he needs to do. He kicked a couple of goals crucially early when we're on a run. Gave us an outlet kick down the line a couple of times. Is his execution at his best? Probably not this year, but I think he still kicked 26 goals or 27 goals for the year. It's a great output. Just not by his standards, clearly, and that's what we hold him to. But I think he was good again today. Mitch McGovern playing forward is probably the last player I'll talk about, to be honest. But I think there may be a few people that critique the coaching performance again today because we choked the lead. I hope I've been able to give some perspective on the fact that it was a pretty consistent performance outside of what the scoreboard tells you. From my perspective, anyway. But Mitch McGovern going forward. So Lewis Young comes out of the team. Vossi decides to switch the magnets around, puts McGovern forward. We're not as tall down back. Got a few more players that can mop up the ball down there. Doherty comes back in as an interceptor, takes 13 marks. Gov played a pretty critical role in the forward half as that hybrid forward, link up. Kicked 1 goal, 1. Set up, I think it was Fantasia for his goal in the second quarter, brilliantly. On a fast break. So he had 1 goal, 1. He had 8 score involvements himself, 2 goal assists as well. So from our, I might even check Lockie Fogarty's goal assist tally here as well for the game. So he had a pretty quiet game. So between McGovern, Williams, Motlop, take out Charlie, who's his spearhead today, between the supporting cast, you got six goal assists in the forward half out of 11 goals kicked. So more than half have come from that supporting cast. And you've got to give credit to Vossi for switching the magnets up there. He's put someone that's a little bit more dynamic than Lewis Young. Lewis Young's been good when he's come in. He's played a role. But he's not as dynamic as McGovern. McGovern's got a bit of burst about him, bit of a leap. Can take a good contested mark. Bit of pace on the lead. He switched the magnets around. He's throwing him forward. Maybe he stays there when Harry comes back in. We seem to be going with that 3 tall structure. And if he does, I'm not really going to be too concerned. I think McGovern knows how to play that role. He played that role for years for us before he went down back. I think he was good today. And you've got to give credit to Vossi and the coaching staff to be able to switch the magnets around like that, especially when you're under the pressure that you're under, to make big selection calls like that and big structural calls. So all in all, good performance. Happy we got the 4 points. More stressful watch than what it needed to be in the end. I still think the scoreboard flattered Essendon. I think we had them on our terms for the majority of the day. Maybe I need to watch the replay again at some point to justify that perspective and that call. But I'll take the 4 points any day of the week over dropping that one. So North and West Coast next 2 weeks. I think I don't know if it's North next week first or West Coast. It's West Coast next week over in Perth. So they were pretty dour against North from what I understand. They choked late. And I think next week we'll show that we're not quite in that class. I know we were sitting 15th prior to today. I don't know where that puts us. That win puts us now. I think it might move us up a spot or two, hopefully. It's moved us up to 11th. Moved us up to 11th. With Melbourne to play tomorrow, who could overtake us, but we're not going to be any less than 12th. 2 games outside the 8 after today. I think next week against West Coast, you'll see the class difference as we saw a few weeks back when we played them at the Adelaide Oval and Gather Round. I'm not going to go into too much of a preview. I don't think there's too much to preview, to be honest. Ins and outs, maybe. Harry clearly comes back in. Did Hudson do enough to keep his spot? He probably did, to be honest, but I think he's going to be a bit stiff. I think he'll miss. Who else on the injury list? I think Cotters. I don't know if he's a chance. I don't think he is a chance. I think that's more of a longer-term one now, unfortunately. Gee, we miss him in the forward half, though, as that link-up chain. His ball use going inside 50s is very, very good. Yeah, he's TBC. Lockie Cowan may come in next week. And that's it. That's it on the injury list. Matt Cottrell and Lockie Cowan. So, and then obviously Harry. So I think Harry probably comes in. Hudson makes way. I think we're going to see McGovern again in that hybrid forward role. They might test the waters there a little bit longer. I think that'll be the only change we sort of see next week. I think everything else looks pretty set in stone at the moment. Maybe a Boyd comes in. I don't know how much he did to justify selection in the VFL, but he could come back in. Anyway, that's that. We're going to... What's the time? 10 to 6. 5:48 p.m. on Sunday here in beautiful, sunny Albania. I want to go enjoy my holiday for another week until next week. Hopefully an easier watch next week and against the Roos the next couple of weeks. But I think it's another Sunday game next week. I think it is. Yeah, we play 10:10 a.m. here, which is, I think, 6:10 p.m. Then there'll be fan cams. I think we'll probably do a pre-record next week because we are playing in Perth. So I think, depending on where I'm at, and I can check that right now, actually. Not that anyone really cares. This is pretty boring for most people to listen to. But I am actually going to be getting into Budva in Montenegro. Budva in Montenegro. So I think me, Dan, and Jules should be able to catch up on StreamYard once I get in. I'm hoping we won't get in too late in the afternoon. I would have been able to watch the game. It should be a pretty easy win, you would think, against the Eagles. So next week, it'll be a Monday episode again. I'll talk to Terry about when we release, but it will be pre-recorded. It won't be live. And until then, go Blues.